Shadow of the Erdtree isn't a DLC about fighting bosses. It's a DLC about the people Marika tried to erase. Every major boss in the Land of Shadow is someone she used, discarded, or destroyed to build her Golden Order. Today we're breaking down all 8 of them, and everything they reveal about the world you thought you knew, starting with the one she buried deepest, Messmer the Impaler. Messmer is the most well-written character From Software has ever put in a DLC. Not a hot take. That's the community consensus after 2 years of lore dissection, and once you understand his full story, it becomes impossible to argue against. The surface read is simple. He's a demigod who conducted a brutal crusade of fire and impalement across the Land of Shadow. A zealot, a monster, the villain plastered across every pre-release trailer, but he was none of those things, by choice. Messmer is Marika's eldest son, born before Radon, before Miquella, before Malenia. His red hair marks him as a child of Radagon. His curse marks something far darker. A malevolent entity called the Abyssal Serpent writhed inside him from birth, and Marika was terrified of it. So she did what Marika does. She solved the problem quietly. She plucked out her son's eye and replaced it with a seal of grace to contain the serpent. Then she exiled him to the Land of Shadow, her own forgotten homeland, and erased every trace of his existence from history. But before she discarded him, she gave him a mission: destroy the Hornsent, the ancient race that had once enslaved her own people, forcing shamans into sacrificial jars as living offerings. Messmer became her instrument of vengeance. His armor description lays it out directly. She asked him to make himself a symbol of fear, to absorb every ounce of hatred so Marika would never face blame for what she needed done. His words, preserved in the item text: direct thy maledictions, thine ire, and thy grief towards me alone. He did it. Every settlement, every village. And then Marika went silent. His men, preserved as ghostly echoes inside Shadowkeep, still whisper their denial. No, such a thing is utterly inconceivable. We have not been abandoned. But they were. The letter was never coming. When you finally push Messmer to the edge, he tears Marika's seal out of his own eye socket and embraces the abyssal serpent he spent centuries suppressing. His dying words are a direct curse against his mother, a son who spent his whole life as a loyal weapon, finally understanding he was never loved. But at least Messmer always knew who he was suffering for. R'hllana willingly walked away from everything she had for a war that was never hers. R'hllana, Twin Moon Knight. R'hllana is the DLC's best-kept secret, and I mean that literally, because she kept herself a secret. Before she ever picked up a sword in service of Messmer, she was a Carian princess, Renala's twin sister. Let that land. The woman guarding Castle Ensis is the sister of one of the base game's most iconic characters, and 0 people knew she existed. She erased herself from the Academy of Raya Lucaria's records so completely that the community missed her entirely until the DLC launched. She chose to disappear. She and R'hllana shared a childhood memory, 2 young girls watching the twin moons overlap in the night sky, nestled against one another. That moment became R'hllana's signature sorcery. Her most devastating attack is a weaponized memory of her sister, and she left R'hllana anyway, trading her birthright for a place at Messmer's side. Her remembrance says she did this knowing full well that even the brilliance of the moon couldn't save him. She wasn't delusional about what Messmer was. She just loved him anyway. Here's where it gets interesting. The community picked up on something in her weapon description that From Software never states outright. R'hllana and Messmer were almost certainly married. In Ranni's questline, gifting a sword is established as a Carian marriage tradition. R'hllana's twin blades description notes that when two-handing them, she also carries a straight sword engraved with golden flame, Messmer's fire, in a Carian warrior's hand. The weapon text reads, "Here, and here alone, were moon and fire ever together." Her internal game file name is literally Sword of Messmer, her identity, her weapon, her entire existence in the Land of Shadow defined by him. R'hllana didn't try to stop her. She gifted R'hllana a length of her own hair, visible in the helm R'hllana wore into every battle, a parting gift from a sister who understood what love costs. The community noticed one more thing. R'hllana fell for the red-haired Radagon. R'hllana fell for his red-haired son. The Carian women have a very consistent type. If R'hllana's tragedy is choosing fire willingly, the next one never got a choice at all. Promised consort Radon, General Radon, the Red Lion, Starscourge, the mightiest demigod of the Shattering, a warrior so physically enormous he had to study gravity magic just so his horse could keep carrying him. He is the last boss of the DLC, and he arrives not as a triumphant hero, but as a silent vessel for someone else's ambition. And the question the whole community has been arguing about since launch is whether he knew. Here's the setup. The remembrance of a god and a lord reveals that in childhood, Miquella looked looked at Radon and saw a lord, his strength, his kindness, everything Miquella believed he lacked in his own cursed, eternally childlike body. So Miquella made a wish that Radon would one day be his king consort, a tender childhood vow. Sounds almost sweet, until you trace what Miquella did to make it happen. He charmed Mog into kidnapping his own cocoon, establishing the gateway into the land of shadow. He scattered pieces of himself across the shadow realm at stone crosses throughout the DLC, discarding his flesh, his strength, his love, and his doubt to become something beyond human. And then he sent Millennia to Caelid, not for territory, not for politics. The Young Lion's armor text is direct about it. When Millennia let the rot flower bloom in Aeonia, Radon heard a murmur. Miquella awaits thee, O promised consort. The Battle of Caelid, the most legendary conflict in the entire game's history, the event that poisoned a whole region and left 2 demigods broken, was an assassination order. Millennia was sent to kill Radon so Miquella could transport his soul to the land of shadow and place it into Mog's corpse as a vessel. 2 years of base game lore, completely recontextualized by one item description. The consent debate splits the community hard. Those who believe Radon agreed point to the childhood vow, the word promised, and the fact that after Miquella later discards his great rune breaking all his charms, Radon keeps fighting rather than stopping. Those who believe it was manipulation point to the fact that Radon never speaks a single word in the entire DLC, not one line. In a game full of dying confessions and final monologues, the strongest warrior who ever lived goes to his end in complete silence. Miquella claimed to be building a kinder world than his mother's. He used every tool his mother invented to do it. Not every force in this DLC operates through manipulation and loyalty, though. Some are just pure destruction, and nobody represents that better than the dragon who tried to end everything before any of this started. Baal the Dread. Every other boss in this DLC has a sympathetic angle, a tragedy, a manipulation, a love story gone wrong. Baal has none of that. He is just a monster, and he might be the best boss in the whole thing because of it. Baal is a primordial dragon, not ancient in the way the other dragons are ancient. He predates the Erd Tree. He predates Placidusax's empire. He was there before nearly everything, and what he chose to do with that time was challenge Dragon Lord Placidusax himself for supremacy over all dragonkind. He lost. Sort of. Their battle was mutually catastrophic. Baal lost both of his winged arms, his back wings, and his left leg. Placidusax lost at least 2 of his 4 heads. Neither one destroyed the other. Baal fled to the jagged peak, deep in the land of shadow, and has been sitting there ever since, propping his shattered body on the stumps of his destroyed wings, festering. But here's the detail that stopped the community cold when they first saw it. Placidusax's severed dragon heads are still physically embedded in Baal's back. You can see them during the fight, the bite marks of a dragon lord from an age nobody alive remembers, still visible thousands of years later in the flesh of the creature they couldn't kill. From Software told you the entire history of this war without a single line of dialogue. You just have to look. Placidusax's response to Baal's betrayal is what makes his story recontextualize the base game entirely. He created Dragon Communion, the entire magic system players used for hundreds of hours across the full game, hunting drakes and consuming their hearts for power, was invented as a weapon of vengeance against one specific traitor. Florisax, an ancient dragon who takes human form, traveled to the Grand Altar specifically to recruit mortals into this hunt. 2 years of Dragon Communion builds, and the whole time it was just Placidusax's grudge. Baal is also the only boss in the DLC that resists, even in death. His heart item reads that the throbbing continues after consumption, never weakening, and that one day the fire within will consume its devourer entirely. He loses the fight and still promises to win eventually. What makes Baal legendary isn't just his lore. It's Egon, a crippled, half-mad NPC who can summon into the fight and spend the entire boss screaming, "Curse you, Baal," at the top of his lungs. The community compares it to Ahab and the Whale. It carries. But if Baal is the DLC's most unambiguous evil, the next boss is its most unbearable tragedy. Midra, Lord of Frenzied Flame. Midra is the only boss in this DLC where the player is unambiguously the villain. Not a gray area, not a tragic necessity. You walk into his house, you break what was holding, and you are the reason he falls. Before any of this, Midra was a respected Hornsent scholar. He lived in a grand manse surrounded by the abyssal woods with his companion Nanaya. At some point, he made contact with the Frenzied Flame and attempted to become its lord. He failed. He wasn't strong enough, and that failure is what destroyed his life. When the Hornsent Inquisition found out, they came for him. His servants were executed, their headless bodies still lining the path to his home. The Inquisitors drove the great sword of damnation through Midra's right eye, a barbed golden blade whose thorns spread through his entire body from the inside, suppressing the Frenzied Flame while inflicting continuous, permanent agony. The weapon description notes, There is something of the Golden Order in its design. The Hornson invented the same tools of religious punishment that the Golden Order would later perfect. The cycle starts here. With the blade inside him and the frenzied flame suppressed, Midra was left to suffer. Nanaya held him and said one word: endure. The remembrance calls that word a curse, not because Nanaya meant it cruelly, but because endurance without end isn't strength, it's damnation. He endured for centuries. She eventually died. Her body still sits in a chair on the upper balcony of the manse, holding a torch. The community identified what the torch is made from. It's described as a small spinal column with a dying flame of frenzy inside it. There's a painting of the two of them in the manse that shows Nanaya with her hand resting on her womb. The torch is what it looks like it is. When the player encounters Midra in his frail, impaled state, he is barely a threat, a weakened old man with a sword through his skull, shuffling through the dark. Beating that form doesn't end the fight. It breaks his will to keep going. His transformation cutscene is one of From Software's finest. He whispers, "Enough. I have endured more than enough. I ask you forgive me, dearest Nanaya." Then he rips the great sword of damnation out through the top of his own skull, decapitates himself, and becomes exactly the lord of frenzied flame he failed to become centuries ago. You didn't save him from the flame, you pushed him into it. He spent hundreds of years holding on. You showed up and gave him a reason to stop. But Midra suffered in isolation. The next one watched everything she believed in burn to nothing in front of her. Ramana, Saint of the Bud. Romina is the strangest boss in the DLC. No cutscene. No dialogue, no voiced lines at all. Despite fully voiced cut content existing in the game files, she is the only mandatory remembrance boss who says nothing, shows nothing, and explains nothing. Her silence is the most deliberate creative decision in the entire expansion. It makes sense once you understand what she is. Romina isn't a character who wants to be heard. She's a consequence. She was once an attendant of the Church of the Bud, a Hornsent holy site. The Bud symbolized spiritual growth and purification. This predates the Scarlet Rot entirely. Her incantation descriptions describe her butterfly summoning attacks as something that was once considered a sacred act of purification. The Church of the Bud was about healing. It had nothing to do with decay. Then Messmer's crusade arrived. His cleansing fire didn't distinguish between combatants and clergy. The church burned. Her faith burned with it. Her remembrance captures the exact moment everything changed. In the crumbling, burning church, Romina held a bud in speechless silence. That bud became her blade. In the ruins of everything she believed in, she found a twisted, divine element, the power of the outer god of rot, and she wove it into what would eventually become the Scarlet Rot, a purification rite transformed into the most devastating plague in the history of the lands between. Messmer didn't create the rot, but he created the conditions that did. The connection to millennia runs deeper than it first appears. The Rotten Butterflies incantation states that the scarlet butterflies, the goddess of rot's wings, were left without a master after millennia rejected the rot inside her own body. Romina adopted them. She became the caretaker of the elements millennia refused to claim. Her boss music deliberately echoes millennia's theme. Two women shaped by the same divine force, one fighting it her whole life, the other choosing it in a moment of grief. Romina guards the sealing tree that blocks access to Anir Ilim, the final area of the DLC. She is the literal gatekeeper standing between the player and Miquella's ascension. She has no interest in Miquella, no stake in his ambitions. She's just there, a saint who lost her church, standing in the ashes, blocking the door to a paradise built by the same divine order that burned her world down. She doesn't speak because there's nothing left to say. Everything she might have said, Messmer already answered with fire. The community didn't rank Romina among the most beloved fights mechanically, but her lore is among the richest in the DLC. She's proof that the Golden Order's violence didn't just kill people. It created new gods out of the survivors. And speaking of the people Messmer's crusade left behind, the next boss is the most unexpectedly human one on this entire list, Commander Gaius. Gaius is the most divisive boss on this list. Community polls consistently rank his fight near the bottom, because a charging boar in an open arena is a particular kind of frustrating. But his lore is quietly one of the most human stories in the entire DLC, and most people walked right past it. Gaius is a first-generation Albinoric, an artificial being, created rather than born, with legs that never functioned. In the lands between, that makes you property at best and a discarded experiment at worst. The Golden Order had zero use for him. The world he existed in offered him nothing, so he built his own world. He trained under the same Alabaster Lord as Radon, becoming what the Remembrance calls the Red Lion's older brother disciple. He found Messmer, another person born cursed, born wrong, born into a role nobody chose. The Remembrance is precise about what bonded them. Both were cursed from birth. In spite of, or perhaps because of this very reason, Gaius was both Messmer's Mesmer's friend and the leader of his men. Two people the world tried to throw away who decided to stay together anyway. His mount is a massive boar named Gaia, described as his other half. Gaius rides into every battle because his legs cannot carry him. The boar learned gravity magic alongside him. They trained together, fought together, and have been inseparable long enough that the distinction between rider and mount stops mattering. His armor set includes a pair of greaves commissioned to complete the set. The item description notes they were a cruel joke because he could not wear them. Someone made Gaius leg armor. He has no use for leg armor. That detail is either a callous oversight or a deliberate cruelty, and the game doesn't tell you which. The detail that elevates him completely is the pine cone motif engraved across his armor. Radon's description of Gaius, preserved in the item text, calls him an estranged son of gold, a carrion offshoot setting new roots, a seed that fell far from any tree but chose to grow where it landed. Radon saw his older brother disciple as someone who built belonging from nothing, which is exactly what Gaius did. When Marika abandoned Mesmer and the crusade lost all purpose, Gaius didn't leave. His loyalty was never to the mission. It was to the person. He stayed because Mesmer was the first place he ever belonged, and that kind of loyalty doesn't dissolve because the cause behind it turned out to be hollow. The community doesn't talk about Gaius enough. He is proof that the DLC isn't just about gods and demigods and cosmic horror. It's about what it costs to find a home in a world that decided you shouldn't have one. But every character we've covered so far exists in the shadow of two people. And the final boss is what happens when both of those people refuse to stay in theirs, the Scadutree Avatar. Before you can reach Radon, you have to go through this. And most people treat it as a checkpoint, a big tree enemy between them and the real finale. But the Scadutree Avatar is the thesis statement of the entire DLC made into a boss fight, and understanding what it actually is changes how every single section of this video lands. The Scadutree is not just a tree. Director Miyazaki confirmed that the title Shadow of the Erd Tree contains a hidden meaning. The Scadutree is the shadow cast by the Erd Tree. Yes, but it is also the shadow of what the Erd Tree once was before Marika turned it into an instrument of order. Every act of ordering, purifying, and erasing that built the Golden Order generated a corresponding darkness. The Shadow Realm is where that darkness accumulated. The Scadutree grew from it. The Japanese text describing the tree goes further. It states that the Scadutree was born of dark notions that bear no sense of order, that twist and bend its stock, rendering it brittle. The word translated as notions refers specifically to thoughts or feelings from an active consciousness. The Scadutree grew from Marika's guilty mind, her suppressed grief over Mesmer, her shame over the Hornsent, her fear over everything she buried. The Shadow Tree is literally her unprocessed guilt given physical form, rooted in the exact geographical position where the Erd Tree stands in Leyndell. Same location, different realm. The Dark Mirror is exact. The avatar guarding it holds Miquella's great rune, the one he deliberately shed during his pilgrimage through the Shadow Realm. He discarded his flesh, his strength, his love, and his doubt at the stone crosses scattered across the land piece by piece, walking away from everything that made him who he was. Without picking up that great rune after defeating the Avatar, the final boss is mechanically unwinnable. Miquella can kill you instantly, with a unique death screen that reads, "Heart stolen," instead of "You died." You cannot face what he became without first reclaiming what he abandoned. That mechanical gate is a story beat. The Great Rune is Miquella's discarded humanity. The game forces you to pick it up and carry it into the fight because Miquella won't. When you finally reach Radon, the fight tells the rest. Phase 1 is titled Promised Consort Radon. Partway through, Miquella physically descends and mounts Radon's shoulder. The boss name changes mid-fight to Radon, consort of Miquella. The wedding ceremony happens while you're fighting him. Then, Miquella empowers Radon with devastating pillars of holy light, and the death screen changes. He tries to steal your will the same way he stole everyone else's. 7 bosses. 7 people Marika or Miquella decided were worth spending. A son exiled and erased. A princess who erased herself. A scholar who endured until he couldn't. A saint whose faith was burned to ash. A soldier who had nowhere else to belong, a dragon still threatening to win from beyond death, and a warrior standing silent at the center of it all, either honoring a promise or fulfilling one he never made. That's what Shadow of the Erd Tree is actually about. Not dungeons, not mechanics. The cost of building a paradise when you decide that cost is someone else's to pay. If you enjoyed this video and want to see every castle in Elden Ring explained, click the video on the screen now.